For Pacifica Radio, June 8th, 2023. I'm Scott Horton. This is Antiwar Radio. All right, y'all, welcome to the show. It is Antiwar Radio. I'm your host, Scott Horton. I'm editorial director of Antiwar.com, and I'm the editor of the book Hotter Than the Sun, Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. You can find my full interview archive, almost 6,000 of them now, going back 20 years ago, at scotthorton.org and at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show and all the video sites, actually. And you can follow me on Twitter, if you dare, at Scott Horton Show. All right, introducing Kit Klarenberg. I interview him all the time. He's from the Grayzone.com, and he does really good work there, which is what got him in trouble with the Scotland Yard, I think. Welcome to the show, Kit. How are you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Well, I don't know if I'm cavorting with a felon here or just an accomplished journalist, but there is no First Amendment over there in England where you're from, and I'm reading here at the Grayzone that you got over your journalism.
Yeah, it was quite a shock, really. I mean, I've not lived in the UK for several years, and I returned on the 17th of May to visit an elderly relative who, might not have very much longer left. So it was an attempt to bid them a warm farewell, perhaps, as bleak as that is. I pulled into Luton, which is one of the worst airports in the entire world. The hottest places in hell have nothing on Luton on a Friday night. But in effect, when we landed, the pilot said over the tannoy, everyone have your passports ready because border control is waiting around the corner. Now, in my naivety, I assumed, or maybe hoped, because there was a sense in my mind that, maybe I would get stopped coming back into the UK, that maybe the airport had been restructured since I was last there, but no such luck. There was a team of 6 plainclothes officers waiting for me at pretty much on the tarmac at the bottom of the stairs. They were checking everyone's passport. They saw mine. They ordered me to come with them. Immediately, I was frog marched, flanked by these officers whose names I never learned. That I only learned their call signs. And at one point, one officer forgot another's call sign. It's like, are you B21 or C37? It was, very surreal, but not funny at all.
I have to say, the time. And I have a great imagination, and I'm picturing this as a scene in a movie with good cinematography and everything. This is pretty exciting stuff when you're the protagonist in it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was just more perplexing, really. At the time, it was just a bit like, okay, well, this is now happening. It throws up all of these uncertainties. Am I going to be thrown in Belmarsh? What's going to happen next? I was walked to this back room, which had no windows. I was extremely hot. And they said that I was being held under Schedule 3 of the 2019 Prevention of Terrorism Act. Now, this is a sweeping bit of legislation. It's not typically used against journalists. They haven't got to that point yet. Maybe I'm the first of a wider trend to come. But in effect, it grants police extraordinary and indeed unprecedented powers in the history of Western quote unquote democracy, and it robs suspects or interviewees of all sorts of fundamental rights. And so it would have been an arrestable offence to not answer their questions. It would have been an arrestable offence not to hand over my passwords and patterns for unlocking my electronic devices. And I might add, Britain was the country that invented the right to silence, which, much of the world, to, varying degrees of seriousness, has taken up as a basic legal principle. And at one stage in British history, it was enforced or observed so stringently that it was actually illegal for suspects to testify in their defense at criminal trials, because it was thought improper that anything they said in their defense might be, turned against them or taken out of context or twisted. So, this is it's quite remarkable. I think, the US has the Fifth Amendment, which is, the right against self-incrimination. That didn't apply here. And so I also, I was subject to a quite invasive search. I had to take my shoes off. I was patted down. They went extensively through all of my bags and my pockets. They took my bank cards. Quite what they did with them, I'm not sure. They took all of my SIM cards. I had some old foreign SIMs that I hadn't used in a year or so that I had to give the PIN codes for. I didn't even know these SIMs were working. What they did with them again, I don't know. Yes, then we got down to business in terms of asking questions. Now, they said up front, well, you're probably going to be wondering why are we asking you this in this kind of friendly, cheerful way? Although, it was, I'm still in many cases asking myself now, and none of the answers I can come up with are pleasant or anything but sinister. So they asked me, do I have a relationship with the Russian government? Am I in touch with Russian media operatives? Have I had any known contact with Russian intelligence officials? Does the Grayzone have any arrangement with the Russian government? Does it publish hacked material as part of a dedicated agreement with the FSB, which is the Russian Federal Security Service? It just went on and on and on. There were specific questions about my journalism. They asked me about my recent 9/11 investigation, which we kind of concluded that it was highly likely that two of the 9/11 hijackers at least may well have been knowingly or unknowingly recruited as assets by the CIA. They were particularly interested in that. They were interested about my background in terms of how I got into national security reporting. They kept on returning to this. They thought it was strange. It was quite incongruous, the fact that they kept on driving this point home, particularly given that I made clear to them that I studied politics at university, so therefore would have an interest in this kind of topic in this field. All of the questions were about Grayzone. It was pretty much the sole focus. They wanted to know how much I was paid. Had I met Max Blumenthal? What are your bank account details of the account that you're paid by Grayzone? As I said, it just went on and on and on.
And it's interesting, Kit, that it seems like all the questions that you cite as examples, they are all things that they could know through signals intelligence without ever talking to you in the first place, right? It almost sounds like just a perjury trap.
Yes, exactly. It seemed like a mass fishing expedition. And actually, when they were asking who funds Grayzone, how does it work? How does the how is the business structured? Does anyone apart from you or Max have access to the Grayzone servers? Who has access to to Grayzone's email addresses and stuff? And it's like, some of these questions I didn't even really know the answer. So but you do feel this compulsion to answer as comprehensively as you possibly can. I felt I had nothing to hide. I felt I'd done nothing wrong. I answered their questions as comprehensively as I thought was appropriate and necessary.
Mm-hmm.
They even thanked me for being so forthright, etc. Maybe that was just window dressing, but yes, the whole thing was extremely bizarre. And I think that the more and more that I think about it, the more it was extremely unpleasant, invasive experience. And I am heartened that so many average private citizens have thought that this is absolutely disgusting. And they are, particularly outside of the UK, they find the idea that you would not have a right to silence completely shocking. And yes, as I say, Britain is the country that is the mother of all democracies. That they're amazed by it. People ask me, why didn't you remain silent? Well, I would have been arrested and potentially jailed. So it's one hell of a trap. And I might add, the wording of the legislation under which I was held is terrifyingly vague and broad. And it has, so for instance, Schedule 3 refers to potential state threats. Now, this is, stopping means that they can stop people at UK borders if they feel that this person poses a threat poses a state threat or is acting on behalf of a hostile state against British interests. Now, the wording states that an individual doesn't need to know or be consciously acting on behalf of a foreign state to pose a state threat. But not only that, the state who they're acting for doesn't need to know either. So it's one hell of a conspiracy where the two conspirators don't know that they are conspiring with each other in service of a particular goal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, I think that, we're getting into the realm here where, we've had probably the real turning point was, like Russiagate, etc. But we have had years of supposed disinformation experts who are actually just experts in spinning disinformation themselves and censorship, saying that, well, even if someone is unwittingly broadcasting or transmitting or disseminating or amplifying quote unquote Russian disinformation narratives, which could be that the war in Iraq was an illegal war of aggression, according to them, then they are effectively guilty of collaborating in a Russian information operation, even if they're doing so unwittingly, and therefore they are legitimate targets for censorship and much more besides online. Now, this seems to be ever increasingly enshrined in law, where whatever the government says constitutes disinformation becomes so. And not only is, yes, kind of provides a rationale for censorship and other anti-free speech, anti-democratic moves,
mm-hmm.
but could potentially constitute a criminal offence.
Yep. All right. So it's Antiwar Radio. I'm Scott Horton, and I'm talking with Kit Klarenberg from the Grayzone.com. And I got a few things on my mind already at this point in the interview, Kit. The first one is that you guys ought to wear this as a badge of honor. You guys do such great work. Max and Aaron Mate, of course. I never say it right. It's Aaron Mate. And
yes.
And your great work, and I'm forgetting the other guy's names off the top of my head, Rubenstein and a couple others, do such great work over there. And so you deserve this in the ironical best sense of that term. And as I wrote on Twitter when I first heard about this, you're quoted numerous times. I already told you this before. You're quoted numerous times in my new book that I'm working on now because you do absolutely crucial journalism. So good for you in that sort of scary way. But so let me ask you, is Julian Assange doing solitary confinement at Belmarsh on your mind as you're sitting there? You already mentioned, what are they going to do to me? And you mentioned Belmarsh. They already have made an example out of him, and you're worried they're going to make one out of you too, huh?
Yeah, well, exactly. And I just think it's, I mean, funnily enough, I was reading Nils Melzer's book on, he was the UN Special Rapporteur on torture as I was flying in. That's been playing on my mind a lot. It's I just think that it in that context, yes, as I say, it seemed like a fishing expedition. It seemed like an attempt to gather all sorts of information. If it's the case that British intelligence legitimately think that Grayzone is a, FSB front, or that I myself am somehow, a Russian state operative, receiving secret directives and, from the Kremlin, then they're completely insane. They make Alex Jones look a sober and sensible analyst. Really, it's just mind-boggling. And I, when I was asked very detailed questions on how we receive leaks, etc., it did spring to mind that yes, they are trying to find out our sources. They specifically asked me when I, kicked off the interview, do you have any journalistic material with you? Because we wouldn't want to pick by accident. And I was asked all sorts of questions about my affiliations to press organisations and journalist unions, etc. And they were asking what kind of protections and benefits there are of joining these organizations. And it's just like, well, I mean, surely they would know that. Perhaps they truly were kind of operating in the dark. They don't understand how journalism works. And they were also trying to gauge how much trouble they were in for detaining me. It's all very perverse. Yes, one thing that did spring to mind when I was being grilled on non-existent connections to the FSB was how one of the reasons that the WikiLeaks was designated a hostile non-state actor by the CIA under Mike Pompeo. I think I was after the Vault 7 disclosures, bombshell stuff about the way that the CIA operates in digital spaces. The reason they did that was because they were tearing their proverbial hair out trying to prove that Julian had ties to Russia or was acting for Russia, and they couldn't prove it because there was no evidence. And it's like, well, yeah, in that context, well, I mean, I, or indeed Grayzone, be subject to the same kind of categorization because they can't find this type of connection? There are all sorts of uncertainties and unknowns from my perspective. Even at this stage, the police still have some of my property. They have not. There's been no indication of when I might get it back. It's being held on the basis that an officer thinks that it may is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, be relevant to criminal proceedings. It's that in itself is disturbing and disquieting, and it has a chilling effect. We at the Grayzone, we refuse to be intimidated or bullied by anyone, I am extremely grateful to count as friends and colleagues some of the finest journalists, and indeed the bravest journalists working today, as you mentioned, Alex Rubinstein, Anya Parampil, Max Blumenthal, and Aaron Mate, who've had my back every step of the way on this, and I'm I forever indebted to them. But not only that, we do have tens of thousands of people, if not more, hundreds of thousands of people around the world, who support us, who think that this is appalling, who have denounced this, and stand ready to fight back if there are further escalations. Again, from a personal perspective, it's not difficult to feel anxious and paranoid because is there a sense of, well, we can, if we haven't been able to prove this charge, or validate this bullshit narrative, well, then what else can we get him on? There's a kind of limbo there, and I'm not going to feel any degree of calm and serenity about this until it's the case is well and truly closed. Again, when that is, I'm not sure.
Yeah, man. Sorry, hang on just 1 second. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for Tennessee Hot Sauce Company. Man, this stuff is so good. They got all different flavors. Garlic habanero, honey habanero, pineapple habanero, poblano jalapeno, and the blood orange ghost. They're all so good, I swear. And for a limited time, Tennessee Hot Sauce Company is featuring official Scott Horton Hotter Than the Sun thermonuclear hot sauce. It's full of Carolina Reapers, scorpion peppers, Dr. Pepper, hydrogen isotopes, and all kinds of things that'll burn your tongue clean off. Seriously, it's really good. Get yourself a hot sauce subscription. Spend $40 or more and use promo code SCOTT to get a free bottle of Hotter Than the Sun hot sauce. That's tnhotsauceco.com. Hey, y'all got to check out these awesome busts of our hero, the great Ron Paul. They're made by the renowned sculptor Rick Casali. They're 13 inches tall, hand-painted bronze resin based on Casali's brilliant original. Y'all may have seen mine in the background on my bookshelf in some recent interviews. The thing is unbelievable. Check out this incredible piece of art at rickcasali.com/Ron Paul, and you'll see what I mean. Use promo code Horton and you'll save $25, and this show will get a little kickback too. That's rickcasali.com/Ron Paul. Casali is Casali. rickcasali.com/Ron Paul. And there's free shipping too. All right, it's Antiwar Radio talking with Kit Klarenberg. What a story here. I mean, who knows exactly how the different authorities operate, and the different jurisdictions and what have you. But again, it seems like all the questions that they asked you were all things that they could have figured out just by tapping your phone anyway, or doing the old, giving you the old Snowden routine. So what I wonder is whether you think this is maybe an indication of a new Russiagate hoax being built, since they know better. I wonder whether they're working on something against the Grayzone or something even bigger than that. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that since the invasion of Ukraine began, all over the Western world, but I think particularly in Britain, the gloves are off in terms of, straight up censorship, in terms of, the criminalization of dissenting viewpoints and inconvenient facts and those espousing or amplifying them. And it really wouldn't surprise me if there is going to be, further action against us, if not by the state, despite the fact that, yes, the British state is, just off leash in terms of criminalizing and prosecuting people at the moment. I mean, there is an individual called Graham Phillips, who is a vlogger, who he I think that, I couldn't disagree with him more politically, and I think that he did the wrong thing, but he traveled to eastern Ukraine when the war broke out, and embedded himself with the Donetsk and the Lugansk separatists. And as a result, he interviewed Ukrainian prisoners of war on camera. Now, I think that was the wrong thing to do, and I condemn that activity. But at the same time, this resulted in the British state seizing his assets and his home. Now, they did this with, just unilaterally did this. And they also, there was internal legal advice that they took, which said that you have absolutely no basis for doing this, but they just went ahead and did it anyway. But Phillips is a controversial character, and also he had no real social media presence. So, I think they probably thought that they could just get away with it. In my case, because yes, there's been this huge, outcry and this outpouring of shock and solidarity within and without the UK. I suspect that if they wish to, destroy my reputation or kind of go after me, they might do so insidiously via bogus civil society voices or organisations like Bellingcat or Friendly Journalists. Now, one of the really interesting things was the National Union of Journalists, which is a journalist organisation in the UK. They put out a statement on my detention. It was quite mild. It was quite concise. It just said it said that this is deeply concerning that these powers were deployed against journalists, and it also it stated that this will be of obvious concern to all journalists, that this was done. And I think that they quite pithily cut to the core of this is not about me. This is about wider issues of press freedom and the right to publish things the government doesn't like. Now, this statement was deleted within about 24 hours, and it seems that. Yeah, it was retracted without explanation, and they've refused to answer questions from myself and numerous other people who've been in touch.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, including NUJ members who've said this is absolutely shocking and have called out the organisation publicly. And so I suspect that the primary cause of this was this huge backlash online from the large number of people I've pissed off over the years. It's just too many people to list who were slamming the NUJ in the harshest possible terms for doing this. And the overriding narrative that they seem to want to get going was that I'm not a journalist. Therefore, the obvious implication being that, well, this isn't a shocking attack on press freedom. This is a shocking attack on an individual who, may be a bit shady. And, several people have been pushing that line, I'm not a journalist. Now, there are very clear parallels with what happened with Julian Assange here, where, one of the ways in which powers that be sought to destroy sympathy for him was by minting the narrative that he's not a journalist, he is a spy or a hacker or a, very reckless publisher of sensitive information. And this very effectively neutralized a lot of sympathy for him and support for him, and served to justify his detention and harassment by authorities. And I see that happening with myself, and it's really it's pretty disturbing. And that there are
well, now wait a minute, let me ask you here, because they have some sort of sophistry where they say that, well, Assange is publishing these documents and just outright dumping them instead of, which he doesn't outright dump them, but that's the way they frame it, rather than publishing articles about them like you would read in the Washington Post or something. Yes. But so I read your articles, and they're articles for a news site, and presumably Blumenthal pays you a nickel or something for them. So yeah. Is there a form of an argument that you're not a journalist, or just that's a name they're calling you, not a journalist?
Yeah, I'm reporting, and I think that it's very curiously and sinisterly, I've written about this. You can find the article on my Substack. One of the ways that the Guardian and the New York Times very, very, very cynically set up Julian Assange was that they worked with him on the Afghan war logs, which this was vast amounts of material that was showing that the absolutely shocking state of the intervention in Afghanistan and exposing US war crimes, etc. The the Guardian and New York Times worked very closely with him on this. And then when it got time to publication, they got cold feet because they were worried about being directly associated with the material in terms of, them facing legal repercussions for this. And so they effectively asked Julian Assange to publish the documents first so they could just claim that they were reporting on them, rather than they were publishing them. And this has been, for a very long time, a very important distinction. So, I mean, it's not something that I seek to weaponize and exploit myself, but the fact of the matter is I am reporting on hacked information. I am not, or allegedly hacked information or leaked information. I'm not publishing the material itself myself. That's done through Grayzone. I yes, receive a nickel or two every now and then from Max for doing this, for reporting on the information that we receive in the form of leaks. Now, in that context, and this was a point I tried to make to the interviewing officers, actually, what matters, because they suggested that what you do is not it might not be in the public interest, and it might be furthering Russian war aims or something. I mean, it's just utterly bizarre. So I just made the point that, well, in that context, when you receive leaked information, where it comes from and whatever agenda the person leaking it or providing it to you is rather irrelevant. I mean, it's certainly irrelevant when the CIA hack into, Iranian or Chinese or Russian government computers and then dump it on the internet via DDoS secrets, and then the Intercept publishers work on it and they win awards, and then it's used to justify the drone murder of General Soleimani. But I mean, that's a separate question. But yes, that like when you report on leaked information, the information itself is the source. If it can be authenticated and if it's in the public interest to publish it, then that it should be under existing press standards and conventions legitimate grounds. But no, we are shifting very, very, very quickly into the realm of even possessing or reporting on classified information is a criminal offence. In the UK, there is this hugely draconian and terrifying bit of legislation called the National Security Bill, which has been passed and will come into effect very soon, which will make it potentially up to life imprisonment for a journalist or a publisher or an editor to be in possession of classified material. This has received zero negative coverage in the mainstream British media. It has been basically ignored by every mainstream journalist covering national security. Now, could that be because it doesn't affect them at all? Like the kind of leaks, as I mentioned, that they're going to be publishing will be handed to them directly by the CIA or MI6 or any of these, this welter of sinister alphabet soup agencies that were really running things in the Western world. That that when they publish quote unquote exclusives and all these scoops, it's because the powers that be want this information out there. They're not going to be affected by legislation that's massively restricting what the public is allowed to know, and yes, like what journalists are allowed to report on, because they're not journalists, they are stenographers for power.
Hey, listen, I mean, the thing is, this is so important, and I know you, and to you it's all about you. You're the center of the story. But for everyone here, this is a fire bell in the night. This is the most important thing. The Ministry of Truth over there on Airstrip 1 is clamping down hard on an independent journalist. They don't have a First Amendment over there, but they are susceptible to public pressure and public opinion. And this should be an absolute scandal and outrage, and especially when they're doing this to a journalist of your caliber. And so I guess we'll see where the other reporters stand. Those who sacrifice Assange and say he's not a real journalist. Is that what they're going to try to say about you? And now I guess real quick, because we're out of time, but do you know, are you under criminal investigation of some kind, or they were really just trying to intimidate you once?
Well, yeah, I mean, theoretically, I am my SD card, which is primarily music and yes, photos of brutalism, is still being held by police. Quite why, I don't know, but this is their reason for holding it is the fact that they feel it may be relevant emphasis on may, to criminal proceedings. So yes, I'm effectively still under investigation and still in limbo. So write to your Congress people, write to your parliamentarians, and please make a stink about this, because as I say, this is not just about me. This is about whether we're going to allow governments to, in the supposedly free democratic West, to dictate what we're allowed to say and know. And this is a very perilous situation where, yes, Britain and America are leading the charge very rapidly, trying to police not only online, but also, like private discussion. It's really disturbing.
Yep. All right, you guys, that is Kit Klarenberg from the Grayzone.com. And read Max Blumenthal's piece all about what happened to him here. British police detain journalist Kit Klarenberg. Interrogate him about the Grayzone. That's at thegrayzone.com. Thank you for your time, Kit.
Cheers, Scott.
All right, you guys, and that's it for Antiwar Radio for today. I'm Scott Horton. Check out my website, scotthorton.org, for all the archives. And I'm at Scott Horton Show on Twitter. And I'm here every Thursday from 2:30 to 3 on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. See you next week.